Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michael Williamson. I'm President and CEO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. I want to welcome you to the Louisiana Leaders webinar series that highlights the big issues facing our community and the leaders who are tackling them head on. As I said, I'm Michael Williamson, President and CEO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. And today we have a distinguished panel which will be discussing why philanthropy is good for business and how we can create equitable communities where health, education, and economic stability exists for all of our citizens. Now we have a few reminders I want to share with you. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay. So feel free to drop any questions for our moderator, our panelists in the chat box, and we'll certainly get to those during the webinar. If not, we'll certainly circle back with you later. Now it is my distinct honor and privilege and pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Ms. Cathy McRae. Not only is Cathy a loyal contributor and supporter of United Way, she also serves on United Way of Southeast Louisiana Board of Trustees, and she's my board chair, so I'm excited to be able to introduce you to her today. She also serves on the Women United Global Leadership Council, representing the work that we're doing throughout Southeast Louisiana on the Women United Global stage. And she's also an immediate past Tocqueville Society Cabinet Chair and past chair of United Way of Southeast Louisiana's Women United. So for those you don't know Cathy, you're missing out, but Cathy's ours now. But she had a distinguished career at Shell Energy Resource Company as Vice President, Capability Deepwater for Shell Upstream Americas in 2015 after over 32 years of service. That's a mouthful there, Cathy. And as VP Capability, she was accountable to improve, grow, and sustain deepwater technical capability, to develop a robust technical talent pipeline where knowledge is transferred for more senior staff and provide underwater, deepwater, UA deepwater technical assurance in projects, wells, and assets. Wow. But Cathy, we so much appreciate not just your leadership to United Way of Southeast Louisiana, but your role as a loyal contributor, always supporting the work of United Way, both with your time, but also with your treasure. So with no further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Cathy McRae.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that introduction. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a story of mine about is philanthropy good for business? So when I first moved to New Orleans in 1996 with Shell, I would tell people in the community that I was with Shell, and they would immediately ask, what law office? So they knew that Shell had a presence because there was a building named after it downtown, but they really didn't know what Shell presence was like in the community. All that changed when Katrina hit. So Shell always had a motto that we serve the communities in which we operate, but it really came into practice after Katrina. When Shell decided to return to New Orleans after Katrina and support the community and support businesses and support its employees that lived and worked in town, it really kind of changed the view, not only of the community that we had for Shell, but people's commitment to the community. So even the most curmudgeon of oil field workers really became kind of teary-eyed when people said, oh, you work for Shell, thank you. And they were very proud to represent a company that invested in the community and really fought for everyone as we came back from that. So that's just my personal story about how philanthropy is good for business, because I know that not only do we have fans in the community, but we also had our employees that really wanted to do better and were really proud of working for Shell. And with that, I'd really like to welcome our distinguished panel. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation for the next hour and a half or so. So I'm just going to introduce them by a one-line sentence, but each of these men are so much more than that. We have Marcus Brown, the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Entergy Corporation. Hello, Marcus. We have Roger Ogden, real estate developer, civic leader, and philanthropist. Hi, Roger. And we have Quentin Messer, President and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. Hi, Quentin. And all of these, so it really occurred to me as I was thinking about introducing folks, the things that we don't really introduce is how caring and committed each of these people are to our communities. And so we're going to give them a chance to talk about not only their business, but their personal views around philanthropy and why that's good in business. So I'm going to kick off the panel, and we're going to start with Roger, and I'd like them to introduce themselves maybe a little bit more, but then really talk to us about what is the importance of philanthropy in your business and in your personal life.
Thank you,
Roger.
Cathy. I think one sentence is a lot for me, but I guess I should say a little bit about my background. I founded Sterling Properties back in the mid-1970s and led the company until about 1994-95, and was succeeded by my primary partner, Jimmy Moran. I then went to work with an old law school classmate, and Daryl Berger and I began a different kind of development together. We focused on urban development, whereas Sterling mostly had focused under my leadership in suburban communities. And so I've had the opportunity, Cathy, to actually start a company that grew into a mid-sized company. When I left the CEO-ship of Sterling, we were about 200 employees, and now under Marty Meyer's leadership, the second generation has taken hold. We're about 250 employees in multiple offices across the Central Gulf South. But the really cool thing, as much as anyone who knows me well knows that I love service and I love giving as I can. And so we were able, our leadership team was able to establish right out of the gate that service component to a corporate mentality and establish a sense of corporate responsibility to community. So Cathy, where you joined a giant global corporation that didn't have that, and I know, I'm going to brag on you a little bit, I know that you were instrumental in bringing Shell New Orleans to the table of community involvement. Mine was starting with a clean slate. I think it's harder to do what you did than what we did, but it's amazing how when you have that opportunity, you can have a direct impact on the culture of a company, no matter how large or how small, forever. And today, under Marty's leadership, I would say that Sterling is more, there's more corporate social responsibility at Sterling today than there was when we were in the saddle. So I've had that experience, and I really, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And so the success of the company from a business standpoint, which is enormous, that's very, very fulfilling. There's no doubt about it. But far more fulfilling is to realize that we established something that still exists today, and that culture is even more embedded than it ever was.
Great, thank you, Roger. Appreciate that opening and introduction. Next, we'll go over to Marcus. And if you would talk a little bit about philanthropy in your business and your personal life. Thank you.
Sure, Cathy. I think you're going to hear a theme through the comments of each of us who were talking about the role we play in, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and why we give. I'm with Entergy, I'm general counsel, but in that role, I have responsibility for our corporate social responsibility team and for our sustainability team. And if any business is concerned about being able to create long-term sustainable value nowadays, not just in the near term, but long-term sustainable value, then you've got to be able to focus on creating value for all of your stakeholders. And that's your customers, your employees, the owners, and the communities you serve. You've got to have all four of those stakeholders an area of focus, or you're not going to be able to stay around for the long haul. And so on a personal level, I think all of us give for a couple of reasons. One is because there's always a tremendous need. You know, in this region, we have some of the poorest working people, you know, in the United States, who are trying hard every day, but Alice households who don't quite make enough to really dig themselves out of some difficult circumstances. And with 30 to 35% of the population at or near the poverty level, there's just a tremendous need all the time. And then secondly, I think people who give also want to impact that. They want to find a way to have some impact on that that will make a difference. And so those are the drivers for many of us. That's the driver for me. You know, I not only recognize those circumstances here, but this is my home. This is where my kids were raised. And so if we can raise up the people around us as we raise up ourselves, I mean, you know, each is, you know, dependent on the other. And so at a high level, and in a not so thoughtful or creative way to describe it, I think that's the motivator for many of us, is to address what we see and try to make it better. And by doing so, helping others, but also I think it comes back to you. And for a company, it really is to provide some long-term value for all four of those stakeholders, not just one.
Great, thank you so much, Marcus. And finally, our third panelist, Quentin. Quentin, if you could introduce yourself and again, address the topic of philanthropy in both business and personal life.
Sure, good afternoon, everybody. Quentin Messer Jr. I'm President and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. We're the accredited economic development organization for Orleans Parish. So we work closely with Michael Williamson and his great team, closely with GNO Inc., LED. I'm really tickled pink. Roger Ogden is one of my favorite people in the world. I don't get a chance to spend enough time with him, so it's good to see him. And Marcus Brown, I'm a recovering lawyer. So I have a lot of respect for what he's accomplished, not only professionally, but personally, and the role model he is for so many people who look like me and look like him, who are proceeding in the legal field. And Michael Williamson, what can you say? He's a dear personal friend. I'm gonna say a couple of things, because I know we want to get to questions and everything. One, the business community in New Orleans is remarkably charitable for its relative size. And I think that we need to celebrate that and cherish that. Entergy New Orleans has been a founding leadership investor in the Business Alliance. It goes without saying what Roger has done in the arts and other communities here in New Orleans. So I think we need to celebrate and cherish that. The other thing we need to realize is that you can't be charitable, and Shell as well, obviously, but you can't be charitable if you don't have profits to begin with. So we have to really, in a moment where there's a lot of tumult and conversation about capitalism and things of that nature, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that this charitable giving, the corporate drives, annual drives, are only a function of companies being well run and being able to have profit. So I wanted to say that. The final thing, personally, I think Marcus and Roger said it, is, I'm going to come at it a little bit from a faith perspective. As a Christian, my pastor says all the time, gratitude is the access to getting more. So, and I think that's the same thing with generosity. And Marcus and Roger have talked about the need. It is tremendous. And we also realize that government alone can't do it. The private sector alone can't do it. Higher ed can't do it. So you do have to be charitable. And the second thing And the final thing is, I think it's an investment in the future. So much of the need is really for young people. Children, I've got 3 children. Children didn't ask to come here. So we have an obligation to, at least for the first 18, 21 years, to try to make life as much of an opportunity for them to be able to attack the world and have a future. So that's a big motivation for my personal charity, is making sure the young people have opportunities for the future.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you all for your introductions and your opening thoughts. As you can see, we have a really incredible panel here. And so I'm going to ask some questions. And if we have any questions from the folks listening in, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I'll try to peer at it and get those questions. But I have a few questions that I thought I'd ask first. So let's start with Marcus on this one, and we'll go around. How do you define your company's corporate and social responsibility strategy? And when you think about that, because there's so many areas in which to give, but how do you describe, how do you tackle your own CSR strategy? And do you have any best practices that you'd be willing to share with the folks on this call?
Sure. When I think about CSR, I think about it in the 4 questions I'm always trying to answer. It's why we give, what we give, to whom do we give, and then what do we expect in return. And I think we were talking about early on sort of some of the whys of why we give. And I think that's an easy question to answer in many respects, because you can look around and you can see all the reasons why you need to give. Then we talk about with them, what can we give? And there's a limited amount of money available. Quentin referenced companies being able to, to sustain themselves and thrive in order to be able to support some of the giving that's done, and that's a big piece of it. But the what we give, particularly for companies, you can give money, but you can also give time, and you can give expertise. And all those things are valuable to organizations and individuals, whether you're teaching somebody how to run their organization more efficiently, whether you are providing, labor from your team to help somebody get something built or done, or solve a problem they have, with an organization that you're supporting, or whether you're giving money. So that is the what you can give. The to whom you give is the tougher question. And I'm looking at Roger, who has been out here in the community supporting efforts across many planes for a long time. And I can only imagine the number of people who show up with really legitimate needs that make sense and are worthy of supporting. We face that question. And what happens is you have to make choices. And so what you try to do is you try to answer the question of to whom do you give, along the lines of what is your business strategy? What things are you trying to accomplish? What are your values? Now for Entergy, that's, protecting the environment, education, and workforce development. Now it doesn't mean that we don't support things outside of that, but it means that we start first by looking at opportunities to join organizations and support organizations that align with that. And it makes it easier for organizations that are aligned in that space to come to us and say, we know this is what's important to you. This is what we do. We have an alignment here. Can we find some way to get together? So that is a way to think about to whom do you give. And then the final question is, what do we expect in return? You do expect results and some accountability. And, and I like to use the United Way as an example of this, is because great causes, passionate people out there who are trying to solve problems, but what you want is to support organizations that have a demonstrated ability to solve problems. And in addition to that, to be able to provide information back to you, the company, that helps you to demonstrate that there's some accountability around the support that you provided. Because we're giving as a company and we're supporting what you do, but we also have stakeholders who we have to go back and talk to and say, this is what we're doing in our community and this is the outcome. And it can't just be, this is how much money we've given. That's only part of the story. It has to be the impact part of that as well. And organizations that can help you tell the story of the impact that you've had, that's a big piece of that. So those are the 4 questions at a high level that we try to answer, and we try to make decisions going down that spectrum of questions.
Great, thank you, Marcus. And you really made a great point around when we think about philanthropy, clearly there's dollars, but it's also about time and collaboration and where we can best invest. And I really do think that that's really important for people to think about getting involved in the community with time or your capabilities, what you're able to share, and how we can collaborate and make the communities a better place. So I'm going to turn, same kind of question, turn it to Quentin. You mentioned that we have a lot of giving in New Orleans. So from an economic development perspective, how do you bring the corporate and social responsibility strategy into your world of economic development?
So it's a great question. So I think we do it in 3 ways. I think one, we have certain economic development tools, be it incentives or other things that help businesses mitigate the risk of opening or expanding in New Orleans. And one of the things that we try to do is we try to make sure that when we deploy incentives, that we try to address a challenge. So for example, one of the things that a lot of the incentives are now focused on really talent development and talent solutions. You saw that with DXC Technology when they came to town. They really entered a landmark $25 million agreement with public universities to expand their computer science and computer engineering capacity so that DXC could have a pool of young people from SUNO or UNO or Southeastern or LSU to come and become employees. So I think that's one way. I think number 2 is, we realize that a lot of young people, they want to be focused on work, but they also want to be immersed in their communities. And so you try to put forth opportunities, where they can volunteer, where they can give their time and lend their expertise. I think in dramatic fashion, you saw that post-Katrina with a number of the leading Carnival crews and others who got really involved in transforming K-12 public education. A lot of work remains, but that's a significant area where you saw philanthropy really move the needle in dramatic ways. And then I think the last thing is, really helping people understand that, that quality of place. When you look at, the fact that you have, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, I mean, that's a tremendous attraction. When you look at what Entergy has done and being one of the best corporate citizens as a utility in the world, that's another sign, and that adds to that quality of place that makes you more competitive when you're competing against other cities. Those things do matter. So those would be the 3 areas I would say.
Great, thanks. No, that is a wonderful point. I think I've really noticed with this, the newer generation in the workforce, that it is really a sense of place and a sense of community and a sense of making the whole better. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think moving forward, that is a very key point for businesses to think about in their philanthropic endeavors. Okay, Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you. You talked about, starting a company. So when you think about how you came up with your strategy of your corporate and social responsibility, are there any best practices that you could share on that point, or thoughts around really how that was developed?
Well, Cathy, you know, any entrepreneur, which I am, like in the dictionary, you see my photograph, is somewhat of a disruptor. So I'm going to disrupt this. We need a little levity in this group. And in that vein, I just want to tell you and Michael, who I assume are responsible for putting this panel together, that this panel of business folks, and I'm going to exclude Marcus from this, so that just leaves Quentin and me, that you've got one old lawyer, two young lawyers, one old JD, two younger JDs, two very rusty JDs in Quentin and myself. And then you've got Marcus, who straddles both the law and business. And so I thought y'all really could have done better than getting three lawyers involved in this business discussion. I think it was Shakespeare in Henry XII that said the first thing we must do is kill all the lawyers. I guess we need to watch our backs, Marcus and Quentin. But to answer your question on a serious note, yeah, it was thrilling, as I alluded to, the joy of starting a new company and all the various aspects that can cause you to fall flat on your face of starting something new or succeed. But without a doubt, having that ability to sort of set the course for a group of people, you know, that, and i.e. a company. And when you're doing that, ironically, I found that I was setting my own course personally, you know, so it kind of affected me too. And in that regard, I believe fiercely that we all have limitations. We have limitations in how much we can give. We all have limitations of time in terms of how much we can give. So I found that both in setting up a program of social responsibility and philanthropy at Sterling, and in my personal life, that focusing is incredibly important. And Marcus sort of alluded to that about what is the mission of the company or your personal mission. I think if we get too scattered, then we can't make as much of a difference in anything that we choose to give ourselves and our fortunes to. And so the way I have done it personally, I'm going to translate now to me, is that I support a lot of different things in appropriate amounts. I can only give my time to so many things, as Michael knows too well. When I agreed to chair the United Way campaign year before last, so in my case, and the reason I agreed to chair the campaign is that amongst my focused missions of giving, of self and of fortune, there's one that overrides and overarches it all, and that is education. And so what United Way isn't thought of as an educational entity, really, that is what we're doing at United Way. It really is. This webinar is about educating fellow business people and others about the importance of social responsibility in every business, and why it's good business to have a robust program of social responsibility. So I think it all evolves from education. It doesn't matter whether it's the arts, whether it's healthcare, you name it. It all in our mission at United Way to eradicate poverty in Southeast Louisiana. You know, I wish we could get a little more ambitious, Michael, but you know, we all know that I think we've kind of got a 30-year horizon that we sort of penciled in to achieve that. in every aspect of accomplishing that, not only is it overarching, but it's also the foundation of how to do that, how to launch that rocket from the pad, and that pad is education. So Quentin is married to an educator, and you know, I know she's tried for years to educate him without great success, but I bet Kenny is doing a lot better job with the 3 kids, Quentin. So anyway, that's I think focusing and then directing most of you, especially with your time, you know, directing your time and stay focused, because there's always a good cause, cause du jour, the cause of the moment, the vogue thing to do. And they're actually, that doesn't mean to demean them, they're important, but you can't do everything.
Great. Thanks, Roger. So those of you that know me know that I'm a geologist and an engineer, and the geologist is always curious. So I actually don't go into everyone's bio. So I didn't even connect the dot that we have 3 lawyers. I just thought we'd have 3 fascinating people that are very involved in the community, and I wanted to get different perspectives on. So I'll leave the, Michael, you need to do a better job making sure the bios are a little bit more diverse out there. But so I didn't even think that, Roger. So glad you pointed that out, I think. But when you talk about education, I want to pause here for a second, and that is actually the reason that I got involved with United Way more than just corporate giving, was when I moved to New Orleans from Houston, and this could go on the economic development side here for New Orleans. So when I moved from Houston to New Orleans, I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and childcare, finding childcare was extremely difficult, and that was from, you know, 2 folks that, you know, had good jobs so that we could afford childcare. But the options, this was, you know, back in the mid-90s, it's come a long way, but the options were much different than they were in Houston. And so United Way and the Women's Leadership, Women United, was formed back, you know, 16, 17 years ago to really address quality early childhood care and education. And, you know, I just wholeheartedly agree that, you know, education is the basis of so many things. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Roger, that, you know, United Way and all we do is really rooted in education, no matter which branch you go through. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to talk a little bit, let's switch a little bit and talk about employees. And so how do you, I'll start again with Marcus, just to give Roger a minute to catch his breath. So I'm going to frame it in 2 different ways, and then Quentin, maybe you can weigh in around companies. So my question is, how do you encourage, motivate employees about the importance of having good corporate social responsibility? And with that, do you think that it matters to them? So I'll turn it over to Marcus.
I'll answer the second question first, and I'll say yes, it does matter to them. And, you know, and so what do you do to encourage or get them to support your CSR efforts? Well, where we like to start is one, you have to provide people an opportunity to support things that they care about and they are passionate about. The corporation obviously will have these broad areas of focus. You know, I mentioned education, protect the environment, and workforce development. But within that, you know, you've got to have things that people are committed and willing to go out and do. And so what we do is we actually, you know, allow our employees to participate in at many levels in helping to decide what we're going to support or support things that they are involved in. And a good way of looking at that is that if you've got a leader in your organization who is on the board of a nonprofit, it's more likely that we're going to support that nonprofit because we've got that leader in that organization helping to direct how things are done. I think the other part of it is, and this is a little bit more in-house, you know, we actually make community service part of each individual's goals in the organization. So there's an expectation that you spend a certain number of hours per year doing something in the community, you know, that you choose to support. And what we do is we will give you the paid time off to do that. And we will, if necessary, we'll provide some kind of support or training for the kind of work that a group of employees might want to go out and do. And what we found is that if it's part of your goals and it's part of your incentive, it's part of what we expect you to do, that's a motivator. But if it's also something that you get to choose to do, and you get to do it on company time if that's what's required, and we support that, you're going to get another level of commitment from employees. And so, you know, foundationally though, I think it all starts with, it's got to be meaningful and it's got to matter to employees. And I think you mentioned something earlier about, you know, how Shell was recognized or viewed when you first got here. It's important to employees how their company is viewed. I mean, you know, are you embarrassed to wear, you know, your company's name on your shirt to a Saints game, or are you proud of that? I mean, that says a lot about, you know, how the employees feel about the company. And I think a big part of that is how the community perceives that company, and that ties back to what you do in those communities. So I think all those things are part of how we think about the employee involvement.
Great, thanks. Quentin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the only additional thought I would say is, and I think Roger and Marcus both hit on it, is I think you have to make it easy and flexible for the employees. And I do think employees, particularly younger folks, do look at the margins on corporate social responsibility when they make decisions about where they're going to go and work. So I do think it's not something that's ancillary. I think it's a core strategic advantage that can be leveraged by companies.
No, that's a great point. I think that is really important, and that kind of helps me pivot a little bit to a question that Keith Lindemann has asked, and it was on my list also. So 2020 has been a year. So we've got this global pandemic. We have a call for social justice that is been very vocal. We have a huge economic downturn facing us. So how do we use corporate and social responsibility in these times? And how do we, and how is philanthropy positioned? So it's kind of a big question. So who would like to take it first? Or do I need to call on somebody?
I'll take a shot at it, you know, and I'll talk about it from a public company perspective, because you said where are we positioned? I think that people who in organizations that rely on the resources of public companies are in a uniquely positive position right now, because companies are really changing the way they look at corporate social responsibility. Some of them because they have evolved and they see the light, others because investors in companies expect you to have a strong ESG program, environmental, social, and governance, or your CSR. All of that, those are things that people used to look at as people were doing good for good's sake. You're giving money in the community, but that's not a part of your business strategy. That is a part of our business strategy now. That is a part of what we have to answer to our investors in terms of what we're doing. And so I think when you are going to companies now and talking about what you do in the community and how you can help to drive what that company determines to be important, that's going to be important to that company, because that accountability piece I talked about, the ability to go back and tell the story of not only where you invested your money, but what were the outcomes. That is information that companies now need, and they want to be able to tell the story to their investors in terms of how they're creating long-term sustainable value for all of those stakeholders. And so you are no longer talking about helping a company support doing good for good's sake. You are now saying, we can help you drive your business strategy. And this isn't something that's relegated to CSR. You got CEOs on earnings calls talking about what they're doing in their ESG or their sustainability space. So I think it's a great time for organizations that do the kind of work that United Way and others do to reinvent themselves, to re-engage companies on how they can work together. And I think the focus is now about how the work of these organizations aligns with the business strategy of these companies, not just their corporate social responsibility. I think that's a maybe a small change in the conversation in terms of how you talk about it. It's a big change in the conversation in terms of what it means and how those companies look at their work in the communities now versus how they might have 5-10 years ago. And that charge in terms of how companies have to focus on ESG is only going to get stronger in terms of what the expectations are by investors. So I think that this is a great position for a lot of organizations to be in, to approach companies and focus very differently on how they have that conversation about the mutual effort to get things done in the community.
Wow. Yeah, no, thank you, Marcus. That's a good point. Putting that together with what Quentin had said about, so it's not only that employees and people coming up are really looking at a company's corporate social responsibility and how they act with respect to the environment, but the investors are looking at that and it's becoming part of their business. I mean, I really do think the landscape is changing, and we need to recognize that and figure out how best to navigate it. And it seems like this year kind of blew everything up and gave us an opportunity to look pretty hard at that. So what are your thoughts about 2020, Roger, and how that's impacting corporate and social responsibility and philanthropy in general?
Well, Cathy, it's enormous. I wish Keith would have asked a more substantive question. His question was enormous. It's what we're all dealing with in our personal lives, in our business lives, and in our social responsibility lives. I think I really defer to Marcus for the most important opinion in this subject because of his position with a significant major public company. And he just, I was just saying, way to go. That was a great answer that Marcus gave. From those of us who are dealing with smaller and Quentin with a significant nonprofit public-private partnership that the Business Alliance represents, I think it's more aligned with what I think smaller companies and individuals need to do and that is one, first of all, we need to nod to the present. We need to be sensitive and responsive to what's happening in the present. And I do believe that we can do that without losing the focus that I spoke about earlier. Quentin needs to keep on the economic development path, because economic development creates value, and value means revenues to all the good things that do all the good institutions that do all the good things, like United Way and every other aspect of service. And the same is true for individuals. So I would just simply say that as we respond to what's happening around us and become educated, and I thought, Cathy, you said a great thing. It's educated all of us to be informed, to look at things maybe a little bit differently, but none of that should cause us to lose focus on where our greatest contribution can be. So I don't know, Quentin, whether you see that the same way. Marcus was he's in such a great position to talk about that big question and that big picture with a major public company. But those of us who are smaller, it seems to me we want to be careful not to lose focus while we're responsive to what's happening in society.
What are your thoughts, Quentin?
No, I absolutely echo what Roger said. Just a brief example from us at the Business Alliance. We, as Roger said, our knitting, our swim lane is economic development. So, but amid the COVID-19, my colleagues sort of said, "Hey, look, we've got to do something." So we contributed and started the Gig Economy Workers Relief Fund. So before the CARES Act provided for funding for 1099 employees, you have a large segment of the New Orleans economy who relies on festival season for 80 to 90% of their income for the year. That was gone through no fault of their own. They just, COVID-19 attacked socialization. No city's economy is more built on socialization than New Orleans, and we do it better than anybody else. So we, put in the first 100,000, and then others, including Entergy and Baptist Community Ministries, and United Way was involved. We ended up raising $990,000. We were able to provide over 1,200 $500 grants to New Orleans, who $500 wasn't going to save them, but we got letters and cards that said, before there was any money, you gave me hope to feed my baby, to get food, to get insulin. And so, to Roger's point, we were focused. We didn't try to do something that we were not built not to do, but we felt that it was vitally important to at least support that part of the local economy.
No, that is a great example. And, so coming from a background with a large company, as Marcus has spoken and Roger alluded to, I wonder what smaller businesses are feeling now, and how to keep that focus that both of you really talked about in the midst of all these changes and upheavals that are going on. And I don't know if either of you have any thoughts. Clearly, the example that you just gave, Quentin, is very good about how when you show you care, people really respond to that, and it's a light. And so just any other thoughts before we move to another question about, maybe the smaller or the private business sector during these times?
Well, Cathy, I'll speak to that since Quentin just got through. I think we all need to be forthright and sober that many small businesses, and virtually all small businesses, are affected by this pandemic and the resulting health and economic crisis that comes out of it. So I loved Quentin's use of the term stick to our knitting. mean, the first thing small businesses need to do is survive. They need to survive. They need to take care of business. And that includes doing the right thing by employees in difficult times. It includes owners of small businesses sacrificing more than they ask their employees to do, if at all possible. And so again, you know, it's interesting. It comes back to that word focus, doesn't it? You know, it is. You know, it's just you can't be any good if you can't rehire your employees. And when you do need to furlough them or even let them go, you can do it in a way where they have bridges. And one bridge that the Business Alliance was able to do, Quentin just went through, and I'm aware of that. And that was a huge, cool thing. We talked about being responsive while we keep our focus. Well, that's exactly what Quentin did with the Business Alliance. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. For small business, this is tough times.
You know, Roger, your comments make me think about a point that I think connects us all, and it's something that we do, but we probably haven't been talking about, and that is the power of advocacy. And you know, and so when you get in a circumstance like this, you know, an Entergy who is talking to a legislator about, you know, another round of the CARES Act is motivated just like, you know, a small business is, and an independent business is, because all of us are interconnected. You know, we have customers, you know, who can't use electricity unless their businesses are operating. So it isn't always going to move the needle, but it is also the power of that collective advocacy, because you know, you're leaning on people to act in Congress or at some other level. We're leaning on, and I think that sometimes we forget the power of doing that together. You know, doing that as a group versus as independent groups, because we're all constituents of the one or two people who happen to be the ones who have to, you know, pull the lever for whatever it is that we're looking for. So I just wanted to make that point.
No, thank you, Marcus. That is a great point. Advocacy is huge, and that is something that we all can do as nonprofits and citizens, to really look at how collectively we can change some of the policies that are out there to really help improve things for all. So I'm glad you brought that up. Quentin, is there anything that you would like to say on this? Or I'm going to look at my list of questions, or I'll ask oh, I think I've got another question. So I'll let Quentin speak, and then I'll peer at this question.
No, I think Roger and Marcus have stated it well. I don't have anything further to add.
Okay, so that was kind of a heavy question, heavy times. 2020 is quite the year. So in the spirit of Roger trying to lighten things up again, I'm going to ask you all, and then I'll reload with another tougher question. What is your favorite philanthropy memory and why? Let's start with Quentin this time. I caught you all off guard with that one.
No, favorite philanthropy, personal or professional?
Either or both.
I
think they're both important.
So I would say personally, you know, I'm nowhere near Roger or Marcus, but my wife and I had an opportunity to make a donation to City Park, and we had a chance to show our children our names on the plaque. And I think that well, like, wow. And then, you know, we kind of explained, and I think it sort of made them realize that we are, you know, fortunate. And I think that, you know, if you can begin educating the next generation That's critically important. I would say professionally, it's the Gig Economy Worker Relief Fund. Or really, there were 4 efforts. The Gig Economy Workers Relief Fund was the biggest, but over the course from mid-March to the beginning of June, the Business Alliance raised $1.5 million in direct relief for New Orleans residents and businesses. So I think I'm very proud. And that meant that I had colleagues who were working 80, 90 hours straight, because we don't, unlike the United Way, we don't do grants. And we were trying to get grants out, and you're dealing with people who don't have checking accounts and aren't used to getting things on PayPal, and you're trying to do that, and you're trying to raise the money, and you're answering grant applications. So I'm very grateful to my colleagues who worked incredibly hard to really make an impact positively in the lives of their fellow New Orleanians.
Great, thank you. They're both great examples. Marcus?
That's a tough question. On a personal level, I guess where we are now in the holiday calendar reminds me of participating in the Doll and Toy Fund giveaway at Xavier University, and we won't be doing it in person this year, which is why I'm reminded of it. But when my kids are 28, 29, or 27, 28, who knows,
Somewhere there.
My wife is going to hate me for saying that. But we got 2 kids. They're grown now, and I really had lost all the magic of what gift giving and holiday means for kids. And so going out there, as opposed to just giving money, standing in there all day and giving away toys to kids, little kids, older kids who were really just excited, and parents are grateful. I mean, that was special in a way that I had not experienced in a while. And then I think from a corporate perspective, we do a lot of different things in a lot of different places. I think the Janeway Lender Prosperity Center, which is housed at the United Way, has so much meaning to us because Wayne Leonard, our past CEO, is the namesake behind it, and just the work that we did together and individually, all of us, to kind of get that off the ground and get it going, and seeing what it's done. That's been a pretty special thing to be able to witness and be a part of.
Yeah, no, thank you, Marcus. My children are the same age-ish as your children are. So you just reminded me how much I'm going to miss being at the Kingsley House this year with the younger kids decorating cookies and stockings and Santa hats and dancing around with them. So hopefully in 2021, we can all kind of reconnect and do that. Okay, Roger?
So I have 2. The one that is the most personally fulfilling to me really had an effect on one person and then their subsequent family. So I have to go back in time to when I was just starting Sterling Properties, and I was fortunate enough. I think we had maybe 7 employees counting ourselves. But I was fortunate enough to meet, through my partner, Ken Barnes, a young woman who had quit UNO. She's from California, and she'd quit UNO and was working at Ichabod's Steakhouse out on the lakefront when Ken was working as a server. She was doing the cashier business part of the operation, and Ken was working to put himself through the University of New Orleans, through UNO. And he introduced me to Michelle. And Michelle was so bright and so she showed out, that kind of person. And so it didn't take long. Within a few months, I could afford to have an assistant. So I asked Michelle, I really thought she was, you know, underperforming her abilities. And so I asked Michelle if she would be interested in joining me and be my assistant. Well, over a couple of year period, she said yes. And after a couple of year period, any of us who've had assistants know that the best assistant is one who's smarter than you are. And it became apparent even before I hired Michelle that she was smarter than I was. But it got to the point, I mean, Cathy, I could say to Michelle, draft a memo to so-and-so or send a letter to so-and-so. You know what I want to say. It's about yada. And she would compose the letter or the memo better than I could compose it. She was an English literature and English major. So, and so after 2 years, the truth was is that I'd had these thoughts for about 12 months of the two years she had been with me, that this is not right either. This is better than the cashier's job at Ichabod's, but this is not right. She needs to go back to school. And I talked with her about what would it take for her to go back to school. And she said, well, basically it's economics. And so long story short is that I supported her going back to school. And this is what I was, although I lost the assistant of a lifetime, this is what I was rewarded with. She was about halfway through, so she had junior and senior years left. Straight 4.0 at the end of the 2 years, and at graduation, awarded a full assistantship to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She, during her assistantship, she taught English literature at Chapel Hill. She was working on her master's and her PhD. Well, they have a student-initiated award that came through the student government, where the undergrad students at Chapel Hill from all of the faculty, tenured and non-tenured, assistantships and full professors, they pick the outstanding faculty member of any given year. Well, Michelle won that. And so today, you know, I started off about overarching, most important thing to give ourselves to is education and education related to, well, today she's a professor of literature at University of North Carolina. So that's my most fulfilling, even though it really affected one person without a doubt. You know, as you can see, I can get choked up over it. The other one Quentin knows a little bit about, and that is that while the museum, in terms of philanthropy, you know, gets major notice, public notice, the big, and this is all personal, the big personal fulfilling thing is I had a dream for many years since I was chairman of the LSU Board of Supervisors, that I wanted to do something significant to keep the best and the brightest in Louisiana and to attract the best and the brightest from outside of Louisiana. I'm talking about best and brightest students. And for too long, Louisiana has educated and then sent all our best and brightest students to Atlanta and to Houston and Dallas and to New York and LA, you name it. So once I was in a financial position to be able to do it, I entered into discussions with LSU to endow the Honors College at LSU, and to endow it in a big way, in a significant way, that we could compete for the best and the brightest students. And so it is named in the honor of my father, who's deceased, and my son, because I named my son for my dad. And the Ogden Honors College now is making a huge difference, not just in LSU, but in the state of Louisiana. We have gone from, I think we endowed it 5 or 6 years ago. We've gone from making a real dent in keeping the best and the brightest in Louisiana to attracting the best and the brightest from places like Atlanta and Dallas and Houston. And so this year, Quentin, I don't know if without Kenya being there, if you are aware, but this year we had the all-time performance in recruiting. We had 20. Let's see, it was we had 800 acceptances to the Ogden Honors College. The average ACT is now 32.6, and the average GPA was 3.9, and what that's done for LSU and Cathy is our biggest cohort of students in the Ogden Honors College from the engineering school. That's not usually associated with honors colleges. And that's what I wanted too. I didn't want it just to be classics majors, you know. So that's the most rewarding, bar none, in terms of affecting the most people, and hopefully in a way that my little self could do. And so that's been thrilling. Nevertheless, still the most personally gratifying is Michelle and her life as an educator. But
so, I mean, all three of you had wonderful stories. But when you think about your story with Michelle and clearly how it touched you, Roger, that think of how many, because of that gift to her, how many gifts she could give others, and how it's rippled out, and everybody who's learned from her, she touched. And so that's the incredible thing about philanthropy. And whether it be through dollars, whether it be through time, whether it be through sharing your talents, the person that you touch could go on and touch so many other people, and the ripple effects are just amazing. And so one of the things when I was listening, and I was thinking about the question for myself, I was listening, this odd little thought came up to me, and I remember that. So I opened this panel talking about how when I first came to work with Shell really didn't have necessarily a huge presence with people in New Orleans, but the Mardi Gras right after Katrina, and we were still, I mean, my group was still working out of Houston, but we came back and we brought a few of the Houston kids that our kids were going to school with to Mardi Gras that weekend, and we were going down St. Charles. And I had a friend of mine who happened to be a lawyer, but she saw me and she pulled me out, and she was with a group of people camped there on St. Charles Avenue. And she said, "This is my friend Cathy. She works for Shell." And so the reason that I thought about that is I'm thinking about all the difficulties and all the challenges we're facing this year in 2020. And how each of us can make a difference, whether it be starting a fund that gives out $500 to a person, whether it be trying to keep a business going, whether it be trying to make sure that early childhood education is continued so we can get critical workers back. What will we say that we have done during this year, and how will that feel in the future? And so just listening to everybody here in this panel, I have great hope. I have great hope for how we move the city forward through these times, difficult times, challenging times. But I think together we can do it. And all your stories and thoughts that you've had have certainly given me inspiration, hope, and things to think about. I'd like to kind of, as we move forward, if you could give advice to either folks that are starting out in their career, or maybe starting a business, or just starting in the world of philanthropy. what kind of advice would you give folks as they're looking to develop either their corporate or their personal social responsibility mission statement, if you will? Pause. And who would like to start? Or I can call on somebody.
I'll start because I'll
you.
probably be the briefest. I think there's really three things. I think Roger said focus. I think focus is incredibly important. You can't do it all. So find your passion, be true to that, and don't let people dissuade you and be pulled in multiple different directions. I think Marcus hit on it with sort of the questions that they use at Entergy. I think people need to always pressure test that focus and make sure that it is still relevant and still germane for where you go. I mean, through life, you're going to change and grow and evolve and have different thoughts. And hey, I want to do this, but I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Hell, I thought I was going to be governor of Florida, and now I'm proudly ensconced in Louisiana. So there you have it. But you have to keep that focus to those things that matter. And the last thing, we haven't talked about it much, but I think it's worth flagging for people, is philanthropy is becoming increasingly more data-driven. You just are not going to win grant awards, I don't think, from Entergy. Marcus can comment, just by tugging at the heartstrings. If you're not in one of those three focused areas and you're not able to show demonstrative results, people may love personally and resonate personally, but when Entergy has to make tough decisions, or Shell has to make tough decisions, or Roger has to make tough decisions, you've got to be able to show here is the return on investment, or here's the lives changed, or here's the downstream benefits. So I don't think people should walk away and believe that you don't have to be at least data driven or data fluent in order to be successful in today's philanthropic age.
No, that is a great point. Thanks for reinforcing and bringing that up, Quentin, about being data-driven and showing that you're making a difference, and people being able to get a return on their investment and moving forward. Roger or Marcus, would you like to add any thoughts on the original question, or?
I'll let Roger go. I mean, he's been at this a lot longer than us in terms of out there in the community and giving and seeing it from different angles. So,
yeah,
I suspect I'm going to learn something here.
Yeah.
Marcus, and I have the silver hair to prove it. And I look at you and Quentin, and it's just disgusting.
I got no hair, Roger. I don't know what you're talking about.
But I've talked a lot. I really don't want to talk too much. I will just add to what Quentin said, which is the importance of data and driving. With regard, Cathy, to your question about how to mentor young people into the idea of philanthropy and of giving, whether it's in their personal lives or their business lives, and hopefully both, I just simply would say to them, and I would tell them the story of Michelle, and I would get choked up like I do every time I tell it. And I'd say, you know what, Tom, Susan, or Harry, you know what, I can tell you the story of starting my business with 2 nickels in my pocket, and the incredible fulfillment of building a major real estate development company and rewards that come from that. But you know what? As proud as I am of that, and as great a ride as it's been, I promise you I won't get choked up about that. So passion, then data. And I'll just conclude, and Cathy, I don't want to talk anymore, but this is related. I'll just conclude by saying that one of the rewards, and I absolutely got to believe, Marcus, that you and Quentin both see this, is that this next generation coming on now, they are way more social conscious than my generation or yours and Quentin's generation. It comes to them more naturally. And I think that bodes well for the future of Louisiana. Quentin started off by saying, you know, as little corporate wealth as we have in New Orleans and the relatively small size of this city and metropolitan area to the large outsized reputation it has as a worldly city, we're incredibly generous. And I'm seeing that in this younger generation, and I think it bodes well, guys and gals, for the future of Louisiana.
I agree.
And Cathy, the only thing I would add to comments that I think capture your question in terms of what people need to hear, I think both Quentin and Roger really hit it on the nail on the head, is if you're young and if you're getting involved in this, it really is a marathon, you know, and I think the beauty of being involved and being driven by your values is that what you will learn is over time you have different ways where you can have an impact. You know, Roger talks about you know, the things that he supports, you know, what he created at LSU. Quentin talks about the work that he does with the Business Council, but that kind of work and those kinds of gifts are based on values that might start with just, you know, volunteering a couple of hours to help somebody do something. Your values won't change. Your ability to do things will as your career continues to develop. And so I would just say, you know, understand that the contribution you might make when you're 25 might be hours on the weekend out at the park with some kids. And when you're 60, you know, it might be writing a check. And all of those things are important. And things will change over the course of your life. So just recognize that, and don't be critical of people who have moved through life and may be writing the check and not in the park anymore because their values haven't changed. You know, it's just that how they can impact what they're trying to impact may have changed.
No, those are all great thoughts. And as we move to wrapping up this panel discussion, I just kind of want to reiterate what our distinguished panelists have talked about. I think they've demonstrated that philanthropy is good for business and that it does matter to people. And it matters to people as they're starting out in their career, as Marcus said, or as they're towards the end of their career. And that that not only people are looking at businesses from their own personal values, but they're also being looked at from in the investment community and what they do. And that clearly we live in a very generous city, and that connections and collaborations and data and return on our investment and making this place, somebody had mentioned that when you make it better for one person, it makes it better for everyone. You know, one of my favorite saying is the rising tide lifts all boats. And we're all in this together, and this community that we have in New Orleans is truly special. And so I want to thank you all for giving your time and your thoughts and your volunteering and your efforts and teaching in this last hour or so. And as I wrap this up, I would be remiss, United Way behind me, is to talk about, we have our campaign chair here. So I just want to talk a little bit about the reason that I support the United Way of Southeast Louisiana is because I truly believe in their mission to eradicate poverty. I mean, through education, through health, through workforce development. I mean, I believe that if we set that goal out there and then we have a blueprint to get there, we can do it. And we have we can do it through advocacy, volunteering, and giving. And so I'm going to turn it over to Marcus, who's the campaign chair for this year, to kind of give his thoughts on why he took on this very important role this year.
Well, I think a lot of the things we talked about today were drivers for me agreeing to work with Michael and the team on the campaign. But the United Way in particular is an organization that I think does the kinds of things we talked about really well. The impact that they have on the community, focusing on things that are important to our business strategy, and then being able to demonstrate to us, how that impact looks, the outcomes that they achieve in the places where they are working, and then also providing an avenue for our employees to support and engage in those activities as well. So I believe in New Orleans, I believe in this company, and I believe that, that there's no better way to support this city than to support an organization that is doing the really good work. And I think that's why you've got Roger on the phone, that's why you've got Quentin here, and that's why you've got the people listening in, because they walk the walk. I mean, they get things done. And so for me to go out and, if there's anything that I hate in life, which is one of my many faults, but I don't like to ask people for things. And yet it is so easy for me to go out and ask for the United Way because of what they do, because of the impact that they have and because the difference they make in this community. So without belaboring it, Michael, Michelle, and the team, they are frankly teaching me, on the job training, a better way to think about and do the job that I do every day at Entergy on the corporate social responsibility, on the sustainability side. I mean, I'm living it through the campaign and bringing it back and, and refining what we do. So from many, many angles, it's just the right thing for me to do at the right time, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you. And I appreciate each and every one of you that zoomed in to listen to this discussion. And really, I want to thank Roger and Quentin and Marcus. You guys are all an inspiration to me. I am just so honored to be on this call with you and to have this conversation. And I wish you all the best as we close out 2020. And I'm looking forward to 2021 when hopefully we can meet in person again soon. So with that, I'd like to close out this Zoom call. And again, thank you, and thank you again, and happy holidays.